And the next?
And the next, then the infectious disease and the immunological workup. It comes. We do it at the same time, but it takes 6 weeks to get the results. In the meantime, we already do the guts and food workup.
Once you've done the workup, would it be antibiotics or what?
It depends. If they have multiple serious infections, and that usually goes together with the severe impairment of the immune system, then you have no choice, because I followed up these patients without treatment and nothing happens. And so you have to, and I treat them specifically depending on the infections we find. But then at a certain moment you have to switch to the immune thing, or do it together. I use a lot of cutapressin, for example. We found out what the mechanism is there with the prions and so on. We found out that it chelates the metals that are used by lime. Lime doesn't use iron, it uses manganese and zinc as food. So it takes away the manganese, too much manganese and zinc. So we use strategies that are very, very precise depending on the infections we find. I mean, for Bartonella we have our strategy, for Lyme we have our strategy, and also of the different types. I didn't have time to talk about this because it's all new, but we have 3 generations now with Bartonella infections. Grandmother has Bartonella, mother has Bartonella, and the child has Bartonella. Grandmother has autoimmune disease, mother has CFS, and the child has autism. So we find now 3 lines, and depends on how they were infected. Maybe mother and grandmother were infected by the cat at the same time, or at the same moment of life, and the child was born with Bartonella. So that's integrated in the brain. So it's completely different. All 3 have an infection, but the infection is completely different setting in the body. So we have to think individually about these things, and I'm not going to treat the grandmother who's happy, who has a few autoimmune diseases because of this, but the mother needs to have treatment, and the child needs to be looked differently, even doesn't get the same treatment as the mother.
Do you see positive effects with probiotics during treatment?
Yeah. I mean, we do a complete analysis of the stool by metagenomics. So we look at the genes for all the bacteria for 200 families. And next month the paper is going to come out. We found a very specific bacterium linked to autism and CFS, and which explains a lot. And it's a bacterium called lactinofactor. The paper is coming out in anaerobe 3 weeks from now. And so it's a bacterium from the Clostridium family.
Excuse me, Ross. Skip by.
And it has a profound effect on neurosteroid. It's a neurosteroid inhibitor. So that explains a little bit what happened in autism. But the mothers still all have. The first studies published is in CFS, and we found in Norway, in Holland, in Belgium. We matched it with normal controls, and it's huge. The p-value is like enormous. It's 40 times higher than normal, 200 times more. Thrombosis of the Bartonella as well. I go on and look in other spots for the Bartonella. We do other testing in other tissues for Bartonella, because in humans there's only 3 to 4 Bartonellas per million red blood cells. In cats there's 1 million per million red blood cells. So it's sometimes we just measure the cat. If there's like more people in the family, we just take blood from the cat. And the cat is positive, and we know which type of Bartonella the cat has. Cats carry up to 10 different species of Bartonella. 10 different types.
So that's just cats, a lot about dogs then.
Dogs is the same as humans. They only have 3 to 4 Bartonellas. Cats do not get really sick. They only get sick of Bartonella when they get cat AIDS. The immune system is broken down by something else. It's a good model. A cat dies of Bartonella when they have cat AIDS. Dogs, they get the same infection as humans, low-grade infection, but they develop adrenal insufficiency and they die of Addison's disease. My dog nearly died of Addison's disease. He was like rescued because the veterinary in the United States, I was staying with and studying Bartonella. I told him, my dog is dying at home. And he says, send him to the vet and have his cortisol measured. And he was later diagnosed with Bartonella. So his cortisol was 0. And he gets 2 pills a day now, he's still alive. See you later.
In Europe you have Bartonella 40% and 10% Lyme.
40% of my patients are positive for Bartonella.
Yeah, but Lyme 10% and in the
No,
United States.
the Lyme is underestimated. It's by PCR. I didn't have time to explain, but the Lyme by PCR has low sensitivity. And so there's probably more in the group I showed that have Lyme.
But what about United States? Do you have some data from the United States?
Yeah, there's 97% have both Lyme and Bartonella.
In USA?
It's also 41%. My colleague in Washington has tested 296 patients with rheumatological symptoms and fatigue and so on. So he doesn't cough kind of fatigue syndrome, but he also has 41%. And we didn't know each other before we met.
Quite interesting, yeah.
When using antibiotics long term, do you also use some kind of steroid drugs to prevent a reboot from the system?
Sometimes, because people with real adrenal insufficiency, we do a cortisol test. We stimulate them with ACTH to see whether there's normal reactions. But the problem with ME/CFS patients is that they have low cortisol, and that Bartonella causes low cortisol levels from CRH, which is low. And so you can give somewhat hydrocortisone, but not too much because you depress your lymphocytic system.
And do you, Dr. Lemina, do you have seen if the use of these 2 elements can have a negative effect on Gcmaf? Antibiotics and antisteroids?
But I start Gcmaf later in the therapy, not in the beginning. I want to eliminate like 80% of the infection first in a normal way, and then I start, because there's not going to be a rebooting of the immune system as long as there's an overwhelming infection. As long as the stress axis is not normal. I mean, you need a normal, intact stress axis for a lot of things. And if that Bartonella or Lyme is depressing your normal serotonin levels in your brain, you're not. That's the reason why people get all anxious over nothing. My ME patients, they get like stressed over nothing because they have low serotonin levels in the brain. And antidepressants don't work because they're serotonin reuptake blockers. There has to be serotonin. That's the.
Yes.
And if there's no serotonin, it doesn't work. If they still have some serotonin, it works. It helps them in accepting their situation. But in 30–40% of patients, I mean, even gives bad reactions to give serotonin reuptake blockers because they have no serotonin production in the brain. That's what Bartonella and Lyme both do, and their partners in there.
But what about precursors of serotonin, yeah?
I give 5-HTP.
Yes.
With limited success because it's destroyed for life. And I don't think it gets where it has to get.
Yeah. What is your opinion about, you said I first treat the gut and the nutrition or something like that. What about all these nutrients like who are needed for the immune system? Almost all nutrients are needed for the immune system. And for example, taurine is also very important for the immune system. It's, the macrophages are sloppy when there's not enough. Yeah. Are you thinking it's a good idea to start the best nutrition possible?
Yeah, that's what we do. But it's still very empirical because it costs too much in the general thing to do all the analysis for all these things. And my nutritionist is now working very hard on this, to making for all the subgroups of the patients. We're trying to subgroup it and to make traditional programs for those who have Lyme and Bartonella. We know that there's going to be a lot of things that's going wrong. Some who have, we have a lot of patients with intestinal parasites that have, now sometimes ME/CFS is elicited after a visit to the Caribbean. People were perfectly healthy and they come back with 2 parasites. And that causes things to snap. And again, they're different from the other ones. So you have to individualize it a little bit. But I said, grossly we start with lactose, 20% is lactose intolerant. In Belgium, 40% is fructose malabsorber. In Norway, it's 66%. So these tests are not just done for no reason. And then in the food IgG test, we find 95% abnormal. And for the record, I have tested 12 laboratories for food IgGs. And what we did, one of my collaborators is he's a scientist, a little bit autistic. And he has huge food problems, so we send blood from him 3 weeks in a row under different names to 12 labs. Okay? And then we looked whether we could put the data on top of each other. Only 2 labs of the 12 that were reliable. And the most expensive in the United States was completely off. There were 3 different results.
Which were the labs that were reliable?
Well, I'm not going to say that because it's for my own use, but I just want to reassure my patients that I'm not just working with a lab because there's some collaboration agreement or something. I chose them because those 2, the one was $150 at the time, and the other one was $600. So I didn't have a problem with it. The two of them were good. The one cost 4 times more, so I took the one that was cheapest. But I did a quality testing of these things, and that's how I chose the lab that I worked with.
I have a question about the success rate. So with a treatment, individualized treatment, what is it?
71%. There was just a study done by a Australian scientist. She's a young scientist and she works with a statistician. They took 30 of my patients on one day and 30 another day. I don't know who they are. It was at random. And there had been Karofsky scores done before, and SF36 and everything had been done in the beginning, 3 to 40 months before they came. She did the analysis, and they looked at the evolution, and there's 71% are better or much more functional or cured. There's 7% worse, and there's 22% that's not changed. The 7% worse are on the average were treated 10 months. In the 71% that were better, they were on the average 18 months treated. So what they calculated is that if that group of 22 plus 7 will be at the 18-month point, there will be a few more positive, and so the 71% will still shift to 76 or 77%, and that's what I see clinically. There's really 20% of patients where I don't get grip on because they have so fundamentally destroyed body with thyroid receptors that destroyed, all sort of things that I will never get them good again, I'm sure. With any strategy I try, I maybe get a little bit better, but not. I mean, these people have been sick for 30, 40 years. And they mostly look hypothyroid. They look very hypo. These kind of people, I can really see it when they come in, but give it a chance anyway. They look very hypothyroid, and they're not hypothyroid. And for the record, you can test those by testing T3/4 in the urine. T4 is high in the blood, higher than T3. It's 3 times higher than T3 in the blood. In the urine, in normal people, it's just the other way around. T3 is higher than T4 because there's peripheral deionization of T4 and T3, And if there's not a demand for T3 because your receptors are destroyed or blocked by something else, your T4, T3 ratio is going to be the same in the blood and urine.